ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome along to this live stream on the evening of the 6th of June 2025. And we are here today talking about as the title suggests, what they exactly does the term far right refer to anymore, given that it is used to throw as essentially a term of abuse, a political abuse, which is thrown around by leftists and a lot of people who call themselves Marxists, with apparently no regard for the actual scientific definition of this. So we're going to be going into this tonight, and we're going to be getting into some of the controversies around the Reform Party in Britain and how anti-fascism has become an empty performance in Britain and also in the United States. I think the same is also true for Germany as well and France, because essentially all of this, where it's anti-fascism, anti-racism, anti-war work, a lot of this has become empty performance, devoid of real content, and that is certainly the case with so-called anti-fascist and anti-racist work. So we'll get into that with reference to reform and other political forces. You can apply this analysis to Trump as well. So what do I mean by the anti-racism becoming an empty performance? So let's just start with that, because what we have in this country, and again, this is true of all of the imperialist countries, particularly Britain and the United States, is anti-racist and anti-fascist work, which almost completely, in terms of the broad movements that are organized, almost completely ignore or soft pedal or make apologies for the influence of imperialism on racism and fascistic groups. And if you're going to do that, which is what the so-called anti-racists in Britain and the United States end up doing, then you're going to ignore the very origin, the very heart of the issue, which is where do racialist opinions and the movements that grow off them originate from. And in the case of Britain, the oldest capitalist and the oldest imperialist power in the world, that at one point colonized directly almost a quarter of the globe and certainly ruled the waves, as the old very appalling tune goes. Well, this came directly from British colonialism, from British imperialism, and British imperialism's vicious usage of strict racial hierarchies to justify its domination of the colonies like India or the African nations. And the same is true for the other European colonial imperial powers. Same is true for the United States. So if you just boil it down to, as many of these so-called anti-racists do, bad people saying bad things, but ignore where the root of all this comes from, then where it originates, then really you're not doing anything of any usage whatsoever. Because what you're boiling the terms far right and fascist down to, if you don't start with a proper analysis of where certainly where fascism actually comes from, then you're reducing fascism again to a set of aesthetics. And we'll get into why that's so dangerous as well. So what we have at the moment is anti-racism and anti-fascism done as performance pieces with, again, no content whatsoever, because none of these groups have any serious link with the masses at all. There was a time not so long ago when Antifa, as in anti-fascism, actually did mean something. And these were mass working class movements tied to the old German Communist Party and even the Social Democratic Party for a while, that existed both before the rise of the Nazis and after World War II. Mass street movements to combat the potential rebirth of fascism. These were real things. These were real bastions of working class organizing in power. That's not what you have now in Britain, certainly. The so-called anti-racist movement is a movement of trade union bureaucrats and wannabe trade union bureaucrats. And their method of dealing with those organizations they deem to be far right or fascist is to run around screaming endlessly about how racist they are, but never examine why these organizations are beyond the pale. And also to make apologies and engage in apologetics for the other bourgeois parties. That's what so-called anti-fascism came down to in this country, which is that they will say that Nigel Farage and Reform, and before them UKIP, and before that the British National Party, who were a legitimately fascist organization, albeit a small one, they'll say that they are beyond the pale and they need to be combated. But in order to do so, you should vote Labour, mostly vote for the Labour Party, or vote Liberal, or vote for the party that will keep the far right out, even if that means the Tory party. And also, we should examine here exactly like what is it that makes a vote for the Labour Party into an anti-racist vote, given that the Labour Party has been a rabid and a very enthusiastic supporter of British imperialism since it first emerged well over 100 years ago, and whose job in office is to act as the second 11, essentially, of the ruling class, and who, when they were first in government, were absolutely ruthless in persecuting fighters for Indian independence. They were as ruthless as any Tory or Liberal administration that came before them. And yet, for over 80 plus years now, and even in the period where everybody is almost prepared to admit now that there's no difference between Labour and the Tories, that the so-called anti-racists in this country will still tell you to vote for the Labour Party to keep the racists out. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? It means you have to ignore all of the racist history of the Labour Party going back over 100 years. It means you have to ignore the fact that the Labour Party leaders have been absolutely implicated in very, very racialist policies, again, dating back over a century, who have been just as fanatical and just as manipulative and just as cynical in their application of immigration laws that are created in ways to deliberately create division within the working class. They are just as much tied into that as the Tories and as the now Nigel Farage's Reform Party are. Remember, it was the Labour Party who introduced such appalling, cruel and racialist methods as the virginity inspections of for South Asian migrant women coming into the country to get married. That was the Labour Party. It was the Labour Party who 20 years ago openly pandered to racialism by saying that they would be tougher on migration than the Tories, and that they would be even tougher than the BNP, the British National Party. And they were the ones who were really going to get it done on immigration. And then they would casually admit later in their memoirs, as I've mentioned numerous times before, that a lot of their stuff on immigration was a deliberate, like, stitch-up job with the press, that they would start scare stories about migration in like the Murdoch-owned newspapers, and then step in with a solution that they conveniently had ready to go by the end of the same week. The idea being to whip up largely working class and middle class opinion into an anti-immigration frenzy, and then step in and solve the problem at the end of the same week. And this is what the Labour Party does as a matter of course. It is very adept at this kind of political manipulation, and is assisted in doing so by the trade union leadership. So what we find, and this was the case 20 years ago with the BNP, is what the BNP would say one day, the Labour Party would come out with a slightly modified version of it like 2 days later. And the same is true now with Farage. Farage is called, a racist, a fascist by some people on the left, and there are mobilizations against reform declaring them to be absolutely beyond the pale. But if you examine the kind of thing that Keir Starmer both says and puts into policy in his latest immigration bill, you'll find that it was every bit as bad as anything the Tories would have done, and very close to the things that that Nigel Farage actually says. And I'm going to do in a future episode a detailed breakdown of how this comes to be and where are the comparisons. Now, this is, and again, we get back to the point about political theatrics. Why is this political theatre? Political theatrics are basically all the system has left to offer. I mean, the bourgeois democracy has been steadily unmasked as being utterly empty for the working class for a long time now. Hence the increasing level of cynicism and the increasing number of workers who just simply aren't voting when it comes to the actual elections, and why you get turnouts in local government elections and national parliamentary elections now to have been relentlessly declining for 30 plus years. And so to reinvigorate faith in the system, the bourgeoisie do need people to actually at least believe that there from time to time that there is some kind of alternative there. So the invention of a non-alternative alternative, which is what Farage and the Reform Party are, is quite useful to the ruling class. Now, how do you, if you're the ruling class and you want people to have some sort of faith in the system, how do you play it? Now, I'll remind you here of the long history of trickery of the British ruling class. You'll often find that that they, as a class, are on sometimes both sides of a division, playing both sides with and putting themselves in the middle as the solvers of the problem that they have created. So you find with the ruling class, when it comes to the domestic political manipulations, that they have their hands in on every side. Some of the ruling class quite genuinely do want a sort of the Reform Party led by Farage to enter government. They do dream of some sort of Thatcherism on steroids, where all the state spending is going to be slashed, and somehow British capitalism will revive itself by being given the Javier Milei treatment. This, of course, is a complete deranged fantasy, and many of the ruling class know this. But if you want to capture discontented working class and middle class votes and reinvest them in the system, reform are actually a good way of doing this. A good way of doing this because what they do is they rile people up by banging the drum on the immigration question and other questions too. But it's mainly immigration that is their big thing. So they rile people up by making big promises to stop the boats, though everybody in the bourgeois political sphere is promising to stop the boats at the moment. But what they also do is, and this is what the ruling class strategy is to make reform look like the dangerous and rebellious choice. And that's necessary because the reform has to capture the still existent angry populist energy that has existed on the floating around in Britain for quite some time now. In fact, ever since the late 2000s, with the collapse of the banking system and the massive bailouts that took place, there's been a lot of rage floating around. It's tried to find outlets through conventional trade unionism, through Scottish nationalism, through support for Brexit, through support for Corbyn, and all of it has been ultimately driven into a dead end. But they know that energy is still out there, so you create a fake populist alternative in the form of reform, and you try to push working and middle class people towards that as the alternative, even though it is a completely fake party. It's actually a private company set up by Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, the two principal leaders of the party, Farage being the big media spokesman. And also, its platform is that of, again, the Tory right wing, but even more aggressive and even more belligerent and even more anti-worker when you actually look at it, which is why the Reform are smart enough to run on mood music and memes. The mood music around them is that they are radical. The mood music around them is that they are dangerous. And the left play their role in making them look dangerous by reacting in the way that they do. So rather than dealing with reform in the way that I am outlining here, which is pointing out the fakeness of their radicalism, the fact that they are a party built by a finance guy, Nigel Farage, and a speculator and a landlord in the form of Richard Tice. They are a party created by capital for the service of capital, that they believe in waging a very, very sharp and bitter class war upon the working class via the removal of things like what is left of the National Health Service and the decimation of public services that will, of course, make the cost of living for the working class escalate dramatically. Rather than talking about that, and basically revealing the fact that Farage and Reform are just a sort of steroid-addled version of the Conservative Party and not actually that far away from the Labour Party. Rather than doing that, the left runs around screaming that the Fifth Reich is coming, that Nigel Farage is the most dangerous man since Adolf Hitler, that fascism is looming, that we need to mobilize now and do literally anything to stop this incredibly dangerous man and his incredibly dangerous party. Well, you couldn't ask for better publicity than that if you're Nigel Farage, because every move that makes him look like a dangerous outsider is all meat to the grist. It's all part of the big plan, or part of the big move to promote him as this dangerous alternative. And people ask, well, why can't people see through this? Why can't people see through the fact that like Farage is just it's just basically a meme, an empty vessel. There's nothing there. Well, there's nothing really there except for bitter, like reactionary garbage in most of the political parties. That Nigel Farage offers absolutely nothing is not exactly, doesn't make him unique. Keir Starmer offers absolutely nothing. Kemi Badenoch offers absolutely nothing. And you can dismantle their policies quite quickly to show that these are mere defenders of British monopoly capitalism and promoters of the most vicious forms of British imperialism, same as Farage is. But to properly expose Farage would require properly exposing all of British bourgeois politics, which the left in Britain doesn't want to do. Why? Because the left in Britain is still invested, in the end, with the project of redeeming the Labour Party. Now, they all deny this. If you floated this to the Trotskyites and the revisionists, they would deny that this was truly what they're about. But certainly in the case of the Khrushchevite revisionists in Britain, they are open in their platform, the British Road to Socialism, of wanting to see still a left-led Labour government, which we're not going to get. And even if we did, it would be something that was such a disaster that it would actually set us back by many, many years. I mean, if Corbyn had got into government, he would have been shut down like quicker than Liz Truss was, and would be on the back benches even quicker than quicker than Liz Truss took that book deal and joined the MAGA movement. So this is something which is very unlikely to, in fact, exceedingly unlikely to happen. And even if it did, it would be a disaster. Now, that doesn't stop like the CPB, Communist Party of Britain, the Trotskyite parties, and others, basically looking to revive Labour by dangling the threat of the far right in front of people who quite legitimately are appalled by racialism and are appalled by like the manipulation of anti-migrant sentiments within the working class, and want to stop what they regard as a racialist party. But by funneling people or trying to promote a vote for the Labour Party, what you're doing is funneling people back towards a party that's every bit as racialist as Reform is, and has a much longer track record of it. Now, for all that Nigel Farage is a con man and a scumbag, like Nigel Farage didn't help give the world the Iraq War. Nigel Farage didn't support the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. Now, Nigel Farage does, rhetorically speaking, support the Israeli regime and its massacres and its murderous rampage in Gaza. But Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, is the one who actually has been out there putting his name to directly supporting the Israeli regime, but also as Prime Minister, he has been responsible for shipments of weaponry to Israel and for authorizing spy flights over Gaza done by the British Royal Air Force, which provided vital intelligence to Israel. So if Farage is beyond the pale, if Reform are beyond the pale, then why are the so-called anti-racists pushing for a vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party, or for the Labour Party in general? Doesn't matter who leads it, who are responsible for racialist policies in Britain, who are responsible for aggressive, violent acts of brutish imperialism in occupied Palestine, in Iraq, in places like Libya and Syria and Afghanistan. Why is that considered to be the anti-racialist option? Why? And when you question people about this, there's various explanations that will come forth. But my argument is, it is essentially an argument about aesthetics. Keir Starmer, despite doing pro-imperialist, racialist things in power, will dance the dance of language and aesthetics. Like Keir Starmer will talk about his commitment to a multicultural Britain. Mind you, Nigel Farage will do that as well now. Keir Starmer will tell you how much of an anti-racist he is. Keir Starmer will tell you how much he supports this dynamic, multicultural, multi-ethnic entity called modern Britain. You know, he's particularly fond of the Ukrainian element. Certain of the Ukrainian element, perhaps. But what it comes down to is the fact that Farage will openly call himself an anti-migrant politician. Starmer will dance the dance of language. He will say that he's in favor of immigration if done the right way. Mind you, so will Farage now. Starmer will pay homage to the right liberal nostrums at the right moment. And that's basically all that the organized left is essentially looking for. They're not actually interested in challenging the root of racialism in Britain. What they're interested in is aesthetics. What they're interested in is performance. What they're interested in is the appearance of anti-racism, the appearance of anti-fascism, the appearance of being anti-war. That the performance of that. They're not actually interested in actually tackling the source of any of these problems. Because if you actually had to tackle the source of these problems, what you would find is that you end up with a system. What you end up with is in a fundamental confrontation with the system itself. And this is because what you end up with is having to go up against the fundamental interests of the British ruling class. That is something which none of the left have the remotest amount of interest in actually doing. And what they, again, are really interested in is luring people into their movements with the pretense that they are. If you look at a lot of these anti-racist so-called demonstrations, what it is a lot of shouting and dancing and no actual content. It's a bunch of people running around screaming, look at them, they're bad, they're racist, never explaining how, never explaining why, never explaining where racialist opinions originate from, never explaining the role of all of the bourgeois parties in promoting racial divisions within the working class, never explore why British imperialism is responsible for the uprooting and the forced migration of millions of people, not just in recent years, but over many, 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 many years. And this is where the left absolutely cannot go, because what they want, and this comes down to what the left actually is, what they want is the restoration of social democracy. As I have said many times before, they want social democracy, welfare capitalism to come back, and they want it to come back in a more, shall we say, acceptable form, with more woke characteristics. I don't know. They don't want to overturn imperialism. They don't want to take on British monopoly capital, because that would involve, again, a dangerous actual class struggle against the ruling class, which most of these left organizations have no intention of waging, and not a clue about how they would wage, or never mind how they would win it. They want the reforms of the post-war period back again. That's all they want. And they are all dedicated to restoring the power and the privileges of those who we refer to as the Labour aristocracy. This is the essence of so-called anti-fascism, anti-racialism, anti-war work today. It is a performance that is only dedicated towards one thing, which is convincing people that the anti-racist work is being done, that anti-war work is being done, and that whilst ignoring what would actually need to be done to revive any of those things. Now let's just turn back to, before we take in some comments, what is fascism and what isn't fascism. Fascism ultimately is the emergency rule of the monopoly capitalist bourgeoisie. That's as talked about by Dimitrov, talked about in slightly different terms by Palmed Up, but that's also something that he brings up too. It's the most extreme form of emergency rule that capital can come up with. When faced with imminent revolution, when faced with the rising working class, the ruling class, the imperialist bourgeoisie, will turn to violent, organized paramilitary street gangs to crush the workers' movement. They will withdraw all bourgeois democratic concessions that have been made to the working class. They will institute a regime of terror to completely crush communists, socialists, and ultimately trade unions. And they will impose, as I said, a regime of terror upon the working class to drastically increase the rate of exploitation of labor in order to try and restore profitability. And then they will do this via the usage of paramilitary terror as pioneered by Mussolini, then the Hitlerites, then the Francoists and others. And the ultimate aim is to crush all working class organization out of existence in order that profitability can be restored by being able to hyper exploit the working class and export contradictions into aggressive acts of imperialism in other nations. This is the model of Mussolini's fascism. It's the par excellence. It is the model of Hitler's Nazism, and it is, of course, embodied in other regimes as well. But those are the two classical ones. And so, whereas the exact form of Hitlerite fascism might not repeat itself in Britain in 2025 or 2026, the same it will be the same causes that bring about a fascist regime if one were to emerge. A fascist regime in Britain isn't going to come about tomorrow through the election of a few Farageist MPs for reform. There will be fascist tendencies and extreme racialists in the ranks of reform, just as there have been in the Tories, just as there's some extreme racialists within the Labour Party, and always have been, by the way. And so what you would only get a fascist regime, a truly fascist regime in this country, when the ruling class were already faced with losing power. At that point, they would risk turning to paramilitaries, because if you're in a situation where the working class has unified behind a revolutionary party to the point where it is posing a significant challenge to the continued rule of the bourgeoisie will turn to will take a desperate and reckless gamble, and that is in mobilizing the lumpenized masses, the ruined petty bourgeois, the ruined working class, putting them in uniform, giving them weaponry, allowing to impose a reign of terror on the revolutionaries, on the organized working class, and then to once that reign of terror has succeeded in bringing fascism, open fascism, to power, then you revitalizing the state forces by flooding them with ideologically motivated fascists. That is, of course, what happened in Ukraine. Though, of course, Ukraine is a state run by comprador bourgeois, so it's a slightly different affair. But it's the same process. You flood the state forces with the ideological cadre of the ruling class, and that is what fascists are when the ruling class is faced with an emergency. The fascists make up the ranks, become part of the ranks of the security forces. The state forces are revitalized by having a new, strong, ideologically motivated component imposed within it. And then the fascists get their fake revolution by going after trade unionists, leftists, communists, anarchists, etc., anybody who might make trouble for the monopoly capitalist bourgeoisie. And so when you see the fascist movements openly emerging and getting mass support, it is because the monopoly capitalist bourgeoisie is already at a state where they fear for their continued survival in power, their continued rule. That's when you will see actual fascism emerging. Trump, Le Pen, Meloni, Nigel Farage, etc. These are all movements headed by people who are opportunists, who are reactionaries, who are pro-imperialist, all of the above. But what they are is they are another step towards the ultimate revolutionary crisis, the ultimate disintegration of the bourgeois system. But they can't be described as full-blown fascist movements just yet, because the bourgeoisie don't need full-blown fascism just yet. They will do in a few years' time. So you're seeing a slow slide towards ever greater authoritarianism. Rajani Palm Dutt, in his book on fascism, identifies various pre-fascist state formations that start to emerge from the late 1920s onwards. And so you can say each of these parties represents a step towards a more open fascism, but we're not there yet. And it's very important to be absolutely open and honest in the way that we actually deal with these things. Because if we're not precise in our language, in our usage of language, what we do is we end up not being taken seriously by the working class. Because if we've done what the left does now, which is run around screaming fascist and racist at everything that moves, then people will just stop listening to you. They will say, well, you called the last five guys racist, so why should we listen to you about this guy? And that is one of the big problems of the left has, having basically turned the words fascism and racism into completely empty and completely devoid of content, because they're just basing it on essentially aesthetics, disconnected to material reality. And that's the left's problem all over. They are utterly disconnected from material reality. So we are at the 35-minute mark. So I'm going to take some comments here and say hello. So we've got Richard, good evening to you. And Robert, hello to you. And hello to Dr. Ahmed, Almir, and to James Graham, to Tim Gray, Alistair Page McGill joining us from Prague, Gonzalo from Madrid, David King, Comrade Davey, Kais, Vasily Morozov, hello to you, Chris Cox, Colonel Oaten, Johan Krober, Caustic Grip, Heidi from Edinburgh. I was in Edinburgh just the other night, in actual fact. That's a celebration of the life and legacy of the great Irish revolutionary James Connolly. Hello to A.D. Kravitz. Colonel Oaten says, far right to me is people who support or use violence. I disagree with you. At a certain point, it may be necessary for communists to use armed force. Has been in the past. So it's not just a case of that violence means far right. That's not the case at all. It's not just you can't just treat violence in the abstract. It's like, well, who is doing the violence? What class forces are behind it? How is it being done? By whom, to whom, etc. Violence in the abstract doesn't mean anything. Hello to Comrade Jason. Gracianol says, I think far right can be anyone who doesn't agree with the bankrupt left. Well, yes, that's generally what it's been used to talk about. Hello to Comrade Jawad, Svetlana from Moscow. Good evening to you. Kawa Justiniano. Johan Krober, who says, still got my Antifa Ernst Fallman book. Good man. Bobby Cleland, hello to you. Why I Ain't Cool on Twitch. James Graham says CPB labor unions are scabs. Also true. Almir says that's how I saw fascism some time ago, as a bunch of crazies blaming other groups for everything. Don't understand where it comes from, how it's used and controlled by the rulers. My understanding of it was so shallow. Well, so was mine at some point as well. Svetlana says, what are we to make of working class support for Enoch Powell in the late 1960s? I would say it's not. It wouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't have been a surprise, given that what Powell was saying was fairly common currency inside the Tory party and not that far away from what people in the Labour Party were saying. Powell was a sort of late period imperial sort of empire lover who was who became rabidly anti-migration. Only after, though, he'd spent some time as a Minister of Health in the 1950s, going around encouraging migrant workers to come into the country to work in the health service. So, and also, like, a lot of his stuff was naked political opportunism. But racialist sentiments within the British working class have been promoted for a very long time. Goes right the way back to the promotion of anti-Irish sentiment in the working class that Marx and Engels got so frustrated with in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the promotion of racialism in working class organizations, and particularly the trade unions, goes back a long way. It's still there to this day, and it is because it is the failure to promote internationalism and the success that the Labour aristocracy has had in promoting bourgeois ideology in the workers' movement that you get support for racialist politicians like Enoch Powell and others. So it shouldn't have been a surprise that a section of the working class supported Enoch Powell, considering that though the sentiments he was expressing had been promoted in the working class for a very, very long time. And the countervailing sentiments have not been promoted anyway, anything like enough. So absolutely shouldn't be a surprise that that Powell gained popularity with a section of the working class. Gracianol says they create a far-right straw man to scare people to vote for them. Very true. Bowser says, Bowser head teacher says, communism killed 100 million people. No, it didn't. And the fact that you openly identify yourself with an iniquitous ideology is not only abhorrent, but shows the state if Britain in W025. Well, the 100 million thing is a lie. It's utter bollocks. And by the way, the 100 million thing, that's something from the Black Book of Communism, which included Nazi casualties in World War II to get to that number. So if you want to mourn the passing of Nazi and fascist forces that invaded the Soviet Union, well, go right ahead, but don't pretend that you're opposed to iniquitous ideologies, because you're supporting the ultimate iniquitous ideology, Bowser, if indeed that is your real name. Somehow, I doubt it is. I wish that you were right. I wish that that my views were representative of the of the state of Britain in 2025. Sadly, though, we're not. But we are working very hard to get there. Hello to Lingy Lou, Potted Rodent. And Svetlana says the far right is increasing massively here in Russia amidst huge migration from Central Asia. A major poll released today said that Russians' main concern is not the SMO, but immigration. Well, then it's not a surprise, given that the Russian capitalist class needs the labor from Central Asia, and that's been. I mean, it's, if I'm remembering this correctly, the labor from Central Asia coming into Russia has been a thing since, well, the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the Central Asian workers are the ones that the Russian capitalist class choose to, or try to hyper exploit. So the Russian working class needs to have this properly explained to it, because it is the Russian capitalist class that is manipulating this and is hyper exploiting Central Asian workers. The Central Asian proletariat and peasantry and the Russian proletariat and peasantry lived in relative harmony with each other for 70 odd years under socialism. But this only the animosity amplifies in the late period of the revisionist times in the Soviet Union, and he's whipped up by opportunistic bourgeois forces in Russia. There's forces from the same class that is encouraging and needs the migration of Central Asians to be hyper exploited, encourages divisions within the post-Soviet working class. So it needs to be explained properly, and that's not an easy job, and it means dealing in arguments and not slogans. And again, I don't not exactly up to speed with how the KPRF is dealing with it, but I would suspect they're dealing with it better than the British left does, to say the least. Why am I saying racialism? Is racialism another word for racism or something? Yeah, it's the old British word for racism. I find it to be a more accurate term than racism. So where are we? Yes, racialism is a British term, says Potted Rodent. Gracian also says Starmer would be considered right wing if he was a politician in the US in the 60s. Well, he should be considered pretty right wing now, to be honest. Dingo Baby says that sounds like the protest the Workers' Party and the Labour Union, I believe it was, marching against the racist who hates migrants UK column covered it. Hadn't seen that one. Hello to Comrade Paul, who joins us. Mo1917. And Paul says, I am concerned by the development in the Homeland Party, which is openly calling for former BNP members to join them. Yeah, I mean, you get Farage and Reform, who are basically just going to move into the territory that the disastrous failure of the Conservative Party is currently in. I suspect that ultimately there will be pressure on Reform to merge themselves with the Tories and call themselves something new. And you'll get basically a re-emergence of this sort of broad, more openly reactionary bourgeois party, whereas the Labour Party will continue to play its role as a slightly veiled ultra-reactionary party. And that's the future. Now, the Homeland Party is more openly fascistic and is calling for the old, as Paul says, old BNP members to join them. And again, they should be tackled properly, which is exposing what they are in a proper class-based way. And I think there are ways to do that, and we'll probably get into some of the ways we can do that in later programs. But yes, there's always a section of the British ruling class in any imperialist country which are funding, and the state is funding these characters to act as a reserve force of reaction, basically. They do the same thing with jihadis. Look at New Syria, says David King. Very true. Good evening to Comrade Ian Foster, to Jenny. Molotov Cocktail says Bruce Wayne is liberal democracy while Batman is fascism. That's a funny line. Molotov Cocktail also says fascism had the fake allure of being rebellious. Well, that's true, and that's a very big selling point, which is that if you examine Mussolini, Hitlerite fascism, etc., Francoism, it all had the aesthetics of rebellion, right down to both Mussolini and Hitler stealing aesthetics from communism and repurposing them in the in the fascist tradition, in the fascist, in form of fascist aesthetics. See, a lot of like the stuff that the fascists did, particularly in Germany, like was a sort of a takeoff and a rip-off of what communist parties did, because they needed a mass base and they needed to be able to have some kind of mass appeal. So they set up like sporting organizations, community organizations, in a way that it was inspired by and ripped off the communists and the old social democrats, because they needed to actually attract in a mass base of workers. But they completely, of course, distorted what the purpose of that was. Trying to get some books, says AD. Have you heard of Red Prince and Foreign Language Press? I've heard of Foreign Language Press. I haven't heard of Red Prince. Far right or imperialist tools, says David King. That's correct. RGSNR says anyone who's not far left. That's incorrect. Mr. Chopin says because basically the people who are screaming that like Farage is far right and beyond the pale are basically like liberals themselves. That's the truth. They're all liberals to one degree or another, and that's the big problem. So they are not they're not far left. They're not communists. They are essentially just a sort of left form of liberalism. Zouter says, evening from Tom in Bradford. Good evening back to you. Cooper Ward says, I'm hesitant to call the far right anything but a psychosis. Typically, fascistic crowds are manipulated by a rational actor, where the internet infograph educated dopes are just alienated and enjoy. Interesting. Kathleen Swift says, Keir Starmer is a miserable traitor. Traitor to what? It would be my question to you, Kathleen. What is he a traitor to? He's not a traitor to the ruling class. He's given them 40 years of dedicated service. He is a traitor to the class that he was born into, because, as we all know, his father was a tool and his mother was a hospital. He's not a traitor to the British ruling class, though. He's been working for them for decades. He's a man who has betrayed his class origins. He's a man who sells out, or should we say, betrays and attacks the working class at every single possible alternative, chance that he gets. But that's his job. His job is that he works for the ruling class. And Kathleen's come back. He's a traitor to the English people. But which English people? Is it the likes of you, me, that he's a traitor to? Or because he's very loyal to the City of London, to all the English people in the City of London? He's very loyal to them. He's very loyal to the big landowners. He's very loyal to MI5 and MI6 and the military hierarchy. He's, a bitter enemy of the working class. So which people are we talking about here? If we're talking about the English working class, then yes, he's a bitter enemy of them. If we're talking about the oppressed people of the world, he's a bitter enemy of them. But again, he's a very good friend if you're English and happen to be a billionaire, or happen to be a big landowner, or happen to be in charge of an intelligence agency that has dirt on him. So when you say traitor to the English people, which English people are you referring to? Nazis even stole the name, says Alistair Page McGill. Yeah, the Nazis, the reason why they're called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, it was originally just the German Workers' Party, is because the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei was set up by a group of German aristocrats who were terrified by the German Revolution, but were looking for a political vehicle that could defend their interests. And given the popularity of socialism in 1918 to 19 in Germany, even a group of aristocrats had to use the term Workers' Party, so Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Hitler was sent into it originally as a spy for the German military to figure out what was going on with it. And later, his role as a spy morphed with with his role as an activist in the DAP, and it became the NSDAP, National Socialist German Workers' Party. Why? It's to trick people. It's to trick people into thinking that the NSDAP was somehow socialistic. Now, Hitler, if you examine his book, Mein Kampf, in between all the hysterical ravings, and you examine his speeches, when he came to talk about socialism, what he talked about was the unity of interests between the capitalist and the worker and the landlord and the peasant. Now, you know, if you've done any studying into this at all, that there can be no unity of interests between capitalist and worker and between landlord and peasant. Both are locked into a life and death struggle that will go on and on and on until the working class is victorious. But Hitler needed to have an appeal to German workers, so he talked about fighting abstract, like things like plutocracy, and he substituted the class war for a racial war, with the Jews standing in for the capitalist class. And that's why he came, that's why he unleashed things like the Kristallnacht, because he needed to find a way, and the Nazis needed to find a way of substituting for the class war. And that's part of the reason why the anti-Jewish pogroms in Nazi Germany built up to the extent where it became a literal murder machine, because this was the Nazis' way of displacing class struggle, and so you had to. It was to displace it onto an assault on the German Jewish and then wider European Jewish population, and also to come up with this sort of classic fascist explanation for why everything kept going wrong, which is that there was a hidden conspiracy of Jewish bankers who were betraying good old-fashioned German capitalists, but were controlling the banking system, and also were controlling like the international communism at the same time. Now, if you look at the old Hitlerite explanation, you find that some of the extremely online right-wingers say roughly the same thing. That communists and bankers are all together and being controlled by a hidden hand. Now, until recently, they didn't say the Jews. Now they've started saying it again. Now, so going back to yesterday, says Caustic Grip, I saw Rockhill's presentation on the roots of fascism. I know he was talking to kids, but his presentation felt completely without substance. I haven't watched it, so I can't comment on it. Kathleen says, normal, ordinary people, yes, like us. Okay, so in that case, I agree with you that Starmer is a miserable traitor to working class people in Britain, and is someone who nobody should place any trust in whatsoever, because he works for the ruling class. And that's what his entire life, his entire adult life has been dedicated to service of the ruling class. I think he's been an asset of the security state from his student days, and has remained one ever since. Now, have they got a ton of blackmail material on him? Well, possibly. If the Ukrainian Zoolander plot is anything to go by, maybe they do. But maybe he's just been that dedicated an agent that it will serve them to the bitter fucking end. But yes, this man is a scumbag, and the party he leads shouldn't receive a single penny of funding from the trade union movement. It should be starved of resources and sent off to die. More on that in future episodes. Failed watercolor artist, says Free Palestine. Chandler says, do you believe it accurate to describe the MAGA regime as fascistic? No, I don't. Because again, like, you got to examine like how American bourgeois democracy actually works, which is that, and then you have to examine, well, what is there an objective requirement in the United States right now for a fascist regime? Now, I would argue, and again, Americans feel free to offer contradictions to this. I would argue no. Because for all that American imperialism is slowly staggering into a greater and greater crisis, the level of class struggle inside the United States, unfortunately, remains still quite low. Like the institutions, Congress, the presidency, the judiciary, are increasingly despised by the American working class. That's true. But are they at the point where the American ruling class is going to invest in a Führer to protect them? Is either going to roll the dice on a street movement of ruined petty bourgeois and lumpenized workers to go out and attack the working class? I would argue they don't need to. Look, for all that America is becoming more unstable, is there a serious challenge to the state forces at this moment in time in the United States? I would argue no. So what is Trump? Well, Trump, in essence, his politics aren't that far away from Ronald Reagan's. When it comes down, if you examine the things that Trump has actually done in office both times, he's really just a continuity candidate with George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama. There are some differences, but it's not that there is a vast world of difference between every American president since Reagan and Donald Trump. So does that mean everybody since Reagan has been a fascist? No, that's the kind of thing that only idiot Maoists argue. Trump is a liberal. Trump is a liberal. The same way that Joe Biden is a liberal, if you can remember what that is. The same way that Barack Obama, George W. Bush, these are all liberals. Now, you might argue with a lot of justification that these people have all committed horrible crimes. They have. But that's liberalism. Like, if you read Domenico Lacerdo's Counter History of Liberalism, you will see just how many, some very, very well documented examples of the horrors of liberalism from its earliest stage, because liberalism is the philosophical expression of the capitalist class. And the capitalist class, to come to power, committed horrendous crimes, first against the domestic working class and then more widely against the workers and peasants of the world. So, yes, liberalism is a horror. Its leaders commit horrible, terrible acts all the time, domestically and internationally. And so, in that respect, Trump is not outside of the boundaries set by previous American presidents. The actions of ICE are the actions of an agency that was set up by George W. Bush. Trump increased its power. Trump looks to repress the pro-Palestine movement. Trump looks to deport people. Yes, of course he does. But Biden was doing all of these things. Biden was going after the pro-Palestine movement. Biden was looking to arrest people who tweeted support for it. Biden was looking to shut down campus occupations. Biden was looking to do all of these things. Trump's done them more aggressively, but that's part of what he's there to do. So Trump is not a fascist. No matter what aesthetics he plays with, liberal American liberals get very upset with the idea that Trump is one of them, but he is one of you. He is. Yes, he attracts a greater crowd. Yes, he knows he's been quite skillful at drawing in an audience and drawing in a movement that went slightly outside of the traditional voting base of the Republican Party. But still, he hasn't inspired the level of fanaticism of a Hitler or a Mussolini. His movement still stays very much within the boundaries of traditional bourgeois democracy. So Trump isn't a fascist. Elon Musk might like to do the old, autistic salute, that kind of thing. But again, he's basically another version of an American liberal. The American ruling class does not need fascism right now to retain its control. They may do when the class struggle intensifies in the near future. But this is the danger of calling everything a fascist. It loses all analytical power. Like, I remember 20 years ago, people were saying George W. Bush is a fascist. I remember columns in the Trotskyite newspapers telling us he was a fascist. And then, 8 years later, Donald Trump comes along and he's also a fascist. So what? America's been ruled by fascists since when? Since Richard Nixon? Since Ronald Reagan? It doesn't make any sense when you break it down. And so people stop listening to you when you say every 4 years that a new president is a fascist. And yes, there are people within the base of the Republican Party who are sympathetic to an American form of fascism. Of course there are. There's a fair few in the Democratic Party who are like that too. So this is why doing a serious analysis of what Trump is requires you to not rely on slogans. It requires you to not go with the prevailing flow on the left, on the American left, which is what the currently existing left in the US absolutely can't do, because they are all what I would call them a bourgeois left that just wants to chase popularity with students and petty bourgeois leftists. Right, let's just go back and find some more comments here. Cooper Ward asks, why, in your opinion, is the racial right full of perverts? Same goes for the anarchist and Antifa types as well. Long answer to that for Cooper. I would say that for a lot of these movements, and this was true of like Mr. Yaxley Lennon's old movement, the EDL as well, that was filled with people who were fucking convicted of sex crimes. I would say that Mr. Yaxley Lennon and others are deeply compromised individuals who are answerable to the state forces. And for these movements, which are controlled to a certain degree by the state forces, yeah, they fill them with perverts and degenerates because these people have a ton of dirt on them and are very easily controlled, a ton of blackmail material. So if you want to run, I mean, same was true, by the way, of like the Ulster Loyalists. The Ulster Loyalists, a lot of them were caught in the King Cora Boys Home scandal. They were being photographed raping children by MI5. This came out a few years ago that MI5 was doing this. They were using it as a source of gathering blackmail material to control who? The loyalist organization, loyalist terror gangs. A lot of their prominent figures were caught abusing children. And that's the ultimate thing for blackmail material. You could fucking get away with murder. You could be less condemned murdering somebody than you could, and rightly you would be condemned in the eyes of everybody for abusing children. So it's a very effective piece of blackmail material. But that is what you, as a security service, that's what you want to have on people who you need to keep under your control. And so that goes for the racialists on the right. It goes for the Antifa types on the left. I mean, a lot of these left-wingers are obsessed with porn and prostitution. I mean, can you imagine the amount of dirt that those people have out there on them? It's probably quite a fucking lot. And a lot of it is stuff that you would not want to come out, that these people want to keep under wraps. So if they've got that on you, then they will bring it out to control you anytime that they want to reel you in. And that's why again, as communists, we have to be absolutely opposed to pornography, to prostitution, and to all of the like degenerate stuff that the bourgeoisie promotes, because they promote it for a reason. Firstly, because it's profitable, and secondly, because like it compromises people. So don't get fucking compromised. Caustic Grip says Rockhill's opinion is that he truly knows better, yet he insists on trying to pull the trots into the ML camp. He'll simply end up becoming a trot himself if he isn't one already. Yeah, I mean, I've seen his work on fascism, and I'm not convinced by it. I've seen some of it. I haven't seen the latest one. Chandler asks, any opinion on the Party for Socialism and Liberation? They do a lot of organizing in my city, whereas the ACP has little presence. I know I've read their theory, and they ultimately originate from a Trotskyite group that was organized by a guy called Sam Marcy. I wouldn't trust the PSL as far as I could chuck them, to be completely honest. I think they're a deeply compromised organization. I think their theories are erroneous, and I think their organization spends its time tail-ending the Democratic Party. There's a lot of hysteria and a lot of screaming and a lot of like melodramatics about them, same way there is with the DSA. But in reality, they perform some of the same functions as the DSA. It's just they're just like a radical, like they're performing typical Trotskyite function, which is to appear radical, but in actual fact just lead you back to the Democrats again. And they're another one who will scream about fascism being imminent, and they do that to lead you back towards voting for the Democrats again. Same way you get with the Trotskyites in Britain screaming about imminent fascism to get you to vote Labour. Sid says, honestly, most people on the left aren't worth paying attention to. Most of them are so naive, they are incapable of questioning what needs to be questioned. Well, we need to keep going in that and make people realize the truth. Bruh says, is that in that conservatism is originally an anti-capitalist ideology? Hobbes, Burke were defending semi-feudalism and absolutism from capitalist revolutions. Real conservatism isn't even pro-capitalist. Well, then what is real conservatism now? I would ask you. I understand what you're saying. Burke, though, I would dispute. I mean, Hobbes was defending late period absolutism. Burke was defending a developed British bourgeoisie because that's when he was writing. Now, yes, British bourgeoisie decorates itself with monarchical trappings. Yes, absolutely they do. But Burke was defending a developed but still early British capitalism. So I disagree with you on that point. Now, so if we're taking this to take up your point, we're taking this into the modern era. What is conservatism? If your definition of conservatism is that it's not pro-capitalist, okay, then what is it advancing? Feudalism? Semi-feudalism? A return to people being tied to the land? I'd be interested. I've heard people who call themselves conservatives talk about this before, but I would be interested in what is the society that you imagine that we could transition into that will be governed by principles of traditional conservatism. Given that traditional conservatism, according to your own definition, defends a pre-capitalist form of societal organization. So what is it? What does that mean in the 21st century at a time of what you would agree is decaying capitalism? So what is the conservatism that you are in favor of? What do you think what according to you does a society based on those principles look like? And how does that relate to decaying capitalism now? Okay. What do I think about the fight between Trump and Musk? I'll come to that tomorrow when I've had time to read up on it. Okay, right. So I'm going to bring things to a close for this evening. I hope this has been an interesting stream. Thanks to all 393 of you watching at the moment. Thanks to all of you who support the show on Patreon and buy me a coffee. The latest Decline and Fall is out now on Substack and on our YouTube page, so take a look at that. I'll be back with you again tomorrow with a special on James Connolly, the great Irish revolutionary. But until then, thank you for watching and good night.